Jake is panicking. Never in his life has he been faced with something more terrifying than this. Never has his heart beat so fast, so hard, so fiercely as it does in this moment. He'd always thought of himself as a calm man. He thought that whatever this assignment brought, he could handle it. He was a fool. He did not know just how bad things could get. It is impossible to describe just how utterly hopeless he felt at this moment. There was absolutely no edible meat on this ship. Of course, he knew going into this exchange assignment that the food would be far from five-star fare. Hell, he even expected that it would be the same freeze-dried soy-based garbage the UNN's vessel pass off as food and practically jams down the throats of its crewmen. But this is far, far worse. This is beyond imagining. There is only one way to express just how utterly terrifying this is, and that is to list the menu options at the cafeteria. Herbivore and carnivore. That's it. Those are the options. No big deal, you might think. Just pick carnivore. Even if it's uncooked, you can just... Nope. No open flames allowed, nor heating appliances of any kind. Heat management is one of the single most important things on any and all spaceborne vessels. It has to be managed extremely carefully, and as a result, cooking anything on a spaceship is entirely out of the question. But even if it were, that's not what carnivore means to these aliens, apparently. Jake wants to kill whatever idiot liaised for this exchange. He wondered if they even bothered asking about food. No, he shuddered to himself. Stupider than that, I bet. They asked about food, and surely the Galactic Union's liaison said something vague like, "We support both herbivorous and carnivorous diets," and the United Nations Navy liaison just took that at face value and asked no further. Jake ruminated about whether or not to use a spork or an actual weapon, but that won't help him now. His only options for food are grass, leaves, insects, and raw something. He honestly wasn't sure what kind of meat that was, but it was certainly raw and uncooked, and there was no way in hell his stomach was going to accept it. He tried asking, but the only answer he got was something called a thrum. And honestly, he didn't even want to imagine what that was. His intrusive thoughts immediately conjured the image of a human thumb with eyes the size of a cow or maybe a pig, and that alone almost cost him what was likely the last breakfast he'd ever enjoy. Jesus, he never thought he'd legitimately look back on freeze-dried jerky and miss it. He's going to die on this ship as soon as the emergency rations he brought run out. They were supposed to be for emergencies, of course, but as far as Jake was concerned, this very much counted. Their first stop is a relatively new colony world at the edge of the Galactic Union's space, relatively nearby to Earth. After that, it's the great unknown. He'll have to take every opportunity he can to prepare as many rations as possible. He quietly thanks his grandfather for teaching him how to cut and clean game for smoking when he was 15. He is startled out of his silent prayer. "Is something the matter, human Jake?" by one of his now crewmates. He doesn't know their names just yet, but it was a relatively short-looking one. They heavily resembled an owl, but underneath the wings they had a second set of limbs that more closely resembled human arms, except thin and rigid, looking like chicken legs, and with talons that looked straight out of Jurassic Park. The only thing that looked like clothes on them was a hooded cloak, blue-colored with a Galactic Union symbol on it, but no clear marker of rank. Some kind of casual wear, he imagined. In any case, Jake thought that perhaps there might be some way to convince these people to let him cook something, some kind of special alien tech that stores or sinks heat, or anything, really. He was desperate. Yes, actually," he began, which suddenly hushed the entire room, every head and set of eyes turning to face him. Holy hell, were they all listening? Some things are universal, I guess, he thought to himself. New guy always has the attention. The owl-looking alien turned, their eyes focused very sternly on Jake's. He got a bad feeling. Was this some kind of officer and he'd failed to notice a more subtle marker? Was he supposed to be saluting right now? Did he break a taboo? "What is it?" they asked, breaking him out of his brief sequence of panicked musings. He wanted badly to try and find some polite way to avoid answering, but he knew better than to play games with a sergeant. And he just had this very distinct feeling that this is the kind of individual he was speaking to at this moment. Something about the way they looked at him and spoke just oozed authority. He answered, "Well, it's just that the menu is sparse, sir." They cooed like an owl, like just straight-up owl noise. Jake supposed it made sense. They did look very much like an owl, but at the same time it was almost uncanny, really. He did his best to hide his surprise and prayed that they hadn't done anything like preliminary research on human body or facial expression. "Please," they chided. "Here my rank does not currently matter. As long as I am not in uniform or on the bridge, you need not refer to me as such. Just call me by my name, Sita." Shit. They're the captain, aren't they? Eating the same cafeteria well, he supposed it isn't technically slop, it's just all raw, uncooked plant and animal matter, and none of it the kind a human could eat raw or uncooked without serious issues. On the one hand, it's admirable and respectable for the captain to rub elbows with the line crew. On the other hand, he just complained about the ship's menu to the captain directly. He braced himself for whatever chewing out was coming his way. "May I ask you to define sparse? It is my understanding that humans are considered omnivorous?" She requested and clarified. At least he thought it's a she. The voice is high-pitched and very sing-songy, but he can only really guess. He regrets sleeping during the crash course on Union species. Well, dog damn it, there it is. That's what happened. Some wacko decided that the aliens would understand what omnivorous meant in the context of human diet and failed to elaborate just how omnivorous. Which is to say, not at all, actually. Hell, the crew probably thinks he could eat rocks. Honestly, if he could, he'd prefer that over what looks and smells like a cockroach made of sulfur. Now he has to sit here and explain that, and it's gonna make him look like some kind of special snowflake to the entire crew, and that's gonna single him out for special consideration from the others. He went through that once at basic already. He was not going to go through it again. Yes, Sita, sorry. Technically, yes, humans are both carnivorous and herbivorous, to a degree. I just meant to say that I am more accustomed to a different kind of fare, and was having a hard time deciding what to eat. Would, you happen to have a recommendation?" He tried desperately to save face. "Ah, I see. Well, I suppose it would make sense that you would be unaccustomed to the standard supplies, given you are a new species to the Union. My people and I usually prefer the flurmites. Not nearly as good as a decent egg, but the smell at least is somewhat reminiscent. Most of the more actively carnivorous species prefer the thrum, and it is more nutritionally complete, so I do occasionally have to eat it myself. I'm told by my herbivorous crew that the vine leaf has a sweet tone to it that is considered delectable, but that the mixed grasses are more filling." She answered with a very distinct satisfaction in her voice. She practiced that recommendation. She actually considered the possibility of running into Jake and having to give him food advice. Damn it. Why did the captain have to be so nice and considerate? If she were the same kind of jaded asshole as his normal COs, it would be easy to be a little combative and just accept whatever punishment got thrown at him. But now, if he complains about the food, he's gonna feel bad, and that's so much worse than a few hundred push-ups or a couple kilometers of treadmill or cleaning the water reclamation pipes. Whatever. I see. I'll, go with the, vine leaf, then. Beats the hell out of a roach that literally smells like rotten egg. Sita nodded and left with her plate full of that, and Jake was left with one that had a bunch of leaves on it. Hopefully she wasn't kidding when she said sweet. Maybe it's a kind of lettuce? It was not a kind of lettuce. It tasted exactly like you'd think a leaf would taste. bitter and somehow simultaneously mushy and chewy, like a soggy paper towel. Emergency rations it is. Jake spent the better part of a month like this, quietly retrieving a plate of vine leaf, then retreating into his room to secretly dump it in the recycler and then chow down on some rehydrated something or other. It was all mush anyways, once it got freeze-dried and turned to powder. Fancy labels tried to convince him that they were such wondrous things as mashed potato or fresh peas or even applesauce. For his part, he got very good at lying to himself. Thankfully, there were some actual normal foods in the rations, like peanuts and walnuts and granola bars, and other long-lasting grains. If not for these, he'd have truly gone insane. Though he suspects some of the crew already think he is, he's been preparing for the first stop in every spare moment. Whenever he isn't on shift doing routine checks and maintenance, he's in his room sharpening his knives, creating makeshift tools out of the cafeteria sporks, and tying together the metal trays from the cafeteria with tightly wound napkins and bent sporks to create crates to store his future rations in. Thank God they gave him a private room instead of bunking him with someone. Apparently, it's protocol for the first few years to give new species private rooms, gives them time to adjust and ease into close social interaction. For Jake, it meant he had a ton of space to work with. It also meant that most of what the rest of the crew knows of Jake is that he's a reclusive engineer doing something with all the cafeteria trays he's been taking and never returning. In hindsight, it's shocking that none of them reported it. Maybe they just passed it off as a cultural difference and decided against it. All Jake cares about is that today is the day. They're finally here, Eltior Prime. Though until contact had been made with the Union, it was known to humanity as Alpha Centauri Prime. We'd only just discovered that this planet was habitable when days later we detected advanced signals coming off it with a long-range probe the boys at NASA had sent. One thing led to another and bam! First contact. It didn't take long for our communications equipment to get upgraded to FTL speeds. Once the colony scientists realized what the probe was, they immediately requested the Union send a diplomatic vessel to Earth. Entire process took about 5 years, and 4 of that was the probe waiting for a command from Earth to send a one-way message to a suspected alien planet. It turned out we'd been on the Union's metaphorical radar for quite some time. You don't pump out as many signals as we do and not get noticed, but our signals are slow as shit, and their non-interference policy required them to pull back any and all observation vessels and facilities once a species became advanced enough to detect them. So once we started really looking out to space, it ended up being on us to technically make first contact. It's been about 2 months since then, and humanity is still mostly isolated. Earth is way out at the edge of Union space, and while that has driven a bit of traffic our way, humanity has yet to really make a name for itself in much of anything. Earth doesn't have any special resources beyond grotesque amounts of raw usable mass in the form of our gas giants and asteroid belt. But pretty much all of that has been preemptively cordoned off as Earth use only. A way for the Union to ensure that we have what we need to get on our own 2 feet. Mars is terraformable, as is Venus. Between those 2 things and our raw resources, the Union decided that humanity didn't need to be given any extra star systems, meaning that anything beyond Sol, we had to get ourselves either by being the first to start developing or acquiring them economically from whoever else did. The Union has FTL internet of sorts, but new species policy also forbids us from connecting to it for a short period, ostensibly to protect us from possible malefactors or hackers. But if you ask Jake, it's to give them time to wipe it clean of any unsavory political discussions they might not want humanity seeing. Cleaning up their browser history, removing potentially offensive memes, that kind of stuff. But what does Jake know? He's just an engineer. But he was able to gather basic information about Eltior Prime just by asking one of the ship's data scientists. They prepared a nice big pamphlet of pages upon pages of data and information, so Jake ended up spending a great deal of time sifting through that too, all in preparation for his first hunt on an alien planet. He liked what he saw. Eltior has an Earth-like atmospheric composition, fairly typical ecosphere. The whole 9 yards, Microbes, plants, animals, scavengers, predators, and even a bit extra on top, a super predator species that dominated the planet before it was colonized. From what Jake could gather, they're basically like a cross between a bear, a lion, and a hippopotamus. Big, psychotically aggressive, and capable of eating just about anything they can kill, which happened to be just about every other species on the planet. But that's just on Eltior. If his napkin math is correct, the Eltior kill beast, as the Union named it, is actually a fair bit weaker than any of the 3 animals it looks like a cross between, but is way larger due to the planet's lower gravity, puffed up like a balloon, carrying more mass with less actual strength. That, plus the fact that it's at the top of the planet's food energy pyramid, means it's probably packing a ridiculous number of calories per pound and has a ton of pounds to give. Just one of those things, properly prepared, could give him months' worth of food. He also dug into the data to identify edible plants, too. Some dried fruits and extra nuts and grains will go a long way, and most of that he can probably nab from the colonists' local farms as long as he's careful about it. The only issue is time. This stop isn't going to last but a handful of days, Earth days, which is about a week on Eltior. That means if he wants to properly smoke and dry this thing into nice jerky-sized rations, he has to find and catch one on the first day, morning of the 2nd at the absolute latest. That's not a whole ton of time to hunt down a new type of animal you've never even seen before. Speaking of, the only information he found on the kill beast is all about how dangerous it is, the areas they tend to live in, hunt in, how fast they are, how strong they are, that kind of stuff. Thankfully, it seems to just be a fairly generic predator, the kind that boils down to a wall of meat on 4 legs with a bunch of organs inside it. Granted, Jake didn't think there was much in the way of information on Earth about how to cut and clean tiger meat, but at the same time, it's oddly sparse for how meticulously detailed the entire rest of this report is. The colonists went to incredible lengths detailing exactly how to hunt and prepare most of the smaller animals and plants. And while Jake would love to just go with that, the time sensitivity means he has to go big or go home. It's finally time. As the ship was pulling into orbit, he readied himself in the shower. He's pretty sure he scrubbed away a few layers of skin just to try and make sure his scent was well and truly gone. He put together a makeshift hunting outfit with a combination of fatigues and towels. He can't stop himself sweating, but he can try and lock it inside his clothes for as long as possible. The data sheets also mentioned a few local plants with strong smells. His first goal is going to be to find some of those to mask with and then head deeper in. He stood near the loading ramp as the ship made touchdown. Several others among the crew were also there, all of them ready to enjoy the last shore leave any of them were getting for the next year or so. Jake definitely got some looks. One of them even bumped him slightly and said, "Hey, human, the atmosphere is fine. You don't need a spacesuit." He wasn't sure if they were mocking him or just joking, but he didn't care. He can rub shoulders with the rest of the crew when he isn't spending his days trying to ignore how hungry he is. There were some murmurs as well, of course. Why is it carrying so much equipment? Where did it even get that?
What is it doing?
Is that where all the trays went?
I think it's going to war.
Just before the ramp began opening, Sita, whom Jake had learned was, in fact, the captain, approached him. She was dressed informally this time as well, so he didn't salute. "Engineer Jake, may I ask what you plan to do with half of the ship's food trays? It was brought to my attention only a few minutes ago that you've been hoarding them?" She asked, clear concern in her voice. Jake replied, doing his best to act as nonchalant as possible, while also covering up his desperation for decent food.
Human tradition. Gotta hunt something in every new environment. Shouldn't take long. I'll be back before due date.
Attaboy, Jake. If you're gonna paint humanity in any light, kick-ass hunter species seems as good a way as any. Next thing you know, there'll be movies of humans with fancy shoulder-mounted plasma cannons and wrist blades going toe-to-toe with alien bio-horrors in all the hot new flicks and shows. Sita seemed to accept it, if a bit worriedly, just nodding and reminding him. "Make sure to take a communicator with you. and leave your health monitor on. If something were to happen, that would be bad."
Jake simply nodded and set off as soon as the ramp touched down. Klex was concerned, to say the least. He'd been watching the human the entire journey from its homeworld. He was the only one who noticed that it wasn't eating the vine leaf it took to its room. He wondered what it was eating. At first, he thought it was the trays. After all, they never left its chamber once it took them in. But that theory was dispelled when the Albon arrived at Eltior, and it arrived at the unloading ramp covered in what looked like a military uniform stuffed with dry cloths and carrying what seemed to be small crates made of the trays. It bent several of the utensils and tied them together with makeshift rope formed of the cleaning cloths to bind the corners of the trays together. It was carrying the weapon it brought aboard from its previous vessel, as well as several seemingly improved tools of some kind, though Klex could not discern what purpose any of them served. This was too much, he decided, and informed the captain of his findings. However, she seemed trepidatious about confronting it. Is the human so fearful that even the captain is concerned about engaging with it? Or perhaps there is something here Klex is unaware of. He decided he had to get to the bottom of it when all the captain did was tell the human to leave its monitor on. There must be something, and Klex was going to figure out what it was. He followed the human, to the best of his abilities, without notice. His people evolved as herbivores on his home world and possessed a very acute sense of smell. By keeping his flat nose close to the ground, he could smell each of the human's footsteps and accurately identify its path without ever needing to enter its line of sight, though usually his nose was far better suited at finding buried funguses and roots. He'd taken pride in the training that landed him his assignment about the Albon. He'd spent years honing his nose to detect far more than simple edibles. Everything had a scent, unique in endless possible ways. There are billions of unique organic molecules and countless billions more ways to proportion them within any given volume. Klex could identify anyone in the galaxy by scent, provided he got a chance to memorize it, and he'd well memorized the human scent. It was moving towards the colony's hydroponics. Food. That's right. It wasn't eating the vine leaf, and it obviously didn't eat the trays, so perhaps it is searching for food? But if the cafeteria was insufficient, why didn't it inform the captain? What could it be searching for that it warranted keeping its diet secret? Klex did not like where this was going, but the nature of how he was following the human meant he was several minutes behind it. By the time he'd arrived at hydroponics, it would be done with whatever it was planning. He decided to hurry and forewent sniffing out its trail. When he arrived, he heard the human speaking with one of the colonists.
"Yes, that's acceptable. They are here to be eaten. After all, I would be remiss to deny them their purpose. We have a great deal of long-term storage, and with your home world so nearby, I imagine it won't be difficult to requisition supplies, if it really comes down to it."
Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me. Is it all right if I take some now for the road?
It speaks. It requested food from Eltior? What is so special about Eltior's food that it warrants making special accommodation? Klex chanced a peek through the doorway and realized immediately. This entire section of the hydroponics is dedicated to fruiting bodies, both of high and low moisture content. Is this it? Is the information on human diet incorrect? Are they not just not omnivores, but in fact highly specific herbivores which require only specific types of plant matter? But why hide this? Why label themselves as omnivores if they cannot truly eat anything? Perhaps it is unique to this human, an allergy, a mutation, a disease. Perhaps it is embarrassed of its dietary needs and feared it may be mocked for them. Does its own kind take such pride in their omnivory that lacking such capacity is a cultural taboo? Klex makes a mental note of this. This must be brought to the captain's attention. But first, the human seems to have another destination in mind. There is more to this, and Klex will not go to the captain with an incomplete report. Something is following him. Jake isn't sure what it is yet. Every time he tries to double back to catch his pursuer, they vanish as if they were never there. Whoever or whatever they are, they're good at hiding, and no amount of covering his tracks has thrown them off.
The only reason he even knows they're here is because he catches rare glimpses or occasionally hears a crack of a branch or thrush of leaves that he didn't create. He'd love to catch them, but there is little time. The fruits and nuts he requested from the colony's hydroponics manager will last him a while, but they're not nutritionally complete. He'd end up hospitalized at some point, and that would be a hell of a way to force the entire ship back to Union space early. He's just going to have to hope that they're content with simply watching, and given how good they are at evading him, he can't imagine they'd get caught by what he's hunting. It didn't take long to find a trail. These things are massive and highly aggressive and highly territorial. Once you get anywhere within several miles, the signs start appearing. Crushed rocks, broken trees, or at least what seemed like trees. The bark was purple instead of brown, which really threw Jake off. But what can you do? And huge marks in the ground from its footsteps. Shallow, surprisingly, but wide and distinct. Definitely a bite-your-head-off type rather than a claw-your-face-off type, just as the data suggested. Which also means that the other suggestions of the data are likely correct as well. It should be asleep or close to it during this point in LTR's seasonal cycle. Most of the markings are relatively old too, which supports the theory. Even so, you never know when a hibernation cycle might get interrupted or broken. Best to be careful and take things slow. That was exactly when everything went to shit.
"Ah, stay away! Stay away!"
Shouting from directly behind him, Jake turned to see the spitting image of the images from the data sheets looming over what looked like one of the other crew members. Is that who was following him? The pig-looking one with the massive nose that took up half its face? In any case, this is bad, real bad. Turns out the kill beast was getting the jump on Jake instead, and only it spotting that other alien saved Jake from getting clever girled by a Xeno super predator. Nevertheless, there was no time to waste. He immediately leveled his rifle and started pumping shots into the thing's flank. Massive, nearly the size of a small elephant, with 4 trunks for legs and purple fur like Barney. But unlike an elephant or the friendly dinosaur, it had a massive head with jaws that opened like a hippo's, except instead of a small number of thick poles for teeth, it had something like 8 rows of shark teeth, each the size of a small dagger. All of them had independently controlled muscle groups, meaning its entire mouth was basically a wood chipper. He could only imagine what happened to him if any part of it got caught in that. So much as a graze could probably drag the rest of him into it like a chainsaw caught on a sleeve. Thankfully, evolution gave Jake a winning hand. It may be huge, but that's only because the low gravity lets it carry more mass with less strength, which means the thing weighs surprisingly little for how big it is, and that means his rifle sent it into a nearby tree. Not quite flying or anything, but it stumbled hard like it got slammed by a log or a boulder. The impact wounds were way larger than Jake was expecting, too. Must have some incredibly high blood pressure to burst like that. For a brief moment, he regretted firing so many shots. That's a ton of meat that got lost. But at the same time, he wasn't going to just sit and watch a walking woodchopper mulch a crewmate. Jake quickly reloaded the small magazine he dumped and prepared for a second salvo. But the thing never stood back up. The tree it crashed into crumpled like tinfoil, and the dirt beneath it was staining a very, very dark color from the frankly copious amounts of blood. Jake approached it carefully and confirmed that it wasn't breathing and didn't have a pulse. Guess it bled out from the wound? Jake was a bit surprised by that, slightly disappointed in fact. It was supposed to be a super predator, even got called a kill beast, and yet here it was, dying to barely 5 shots of 308. Guess the predators back home are just made of sterner stuff. He turned to check on the one that followed him, but they vanished again. Idiot went and got himself caught by a local predator, only to avoid Jake like he was the one menacing him. Whatever, as long as he doesn't interfere. Klex's heart is racing, pounding out of his chest so hard he thought he might die of it. He was wrong beyond imagining. He began to suspect when the humans started wandering into Kill Beast territory. Klex had read the reports. The LTR Kill Beast is one of the deadliest predators ever discovered within its environment. one of a very small number of animals classified as a super predator for its diet of literally every other animal on the planet. He considered warning Jake a few times, but every time Klex began to approach closer, something within him warned him to stay away. He could feel something was wrong. At one point, Jake looked directly at him, but didn't seem to notice. But the look in his eyes was cold, menacing, terrifying. It chilled Klex's blood blue to his very bones. He'd never been looked at that way before, even indirectly. It was like the human wasn't searching for a pursuer, but for prey. When the kill beast discovered him, he thought that would be his end, but then Jake turned and bore his weapon with such speed and precision that Klex thought it might have been cybernetically enhanced. 5 ringing discharges of that primitive weapon, and the kill beast died. Just like that, it stumbled into a tree. The tree collapsed from the impact and fell over dead. Klex had learned that the human's primitive projectile weapons were the most powerful in terms of sheer force ever discovered for a new species, but he had hardly believed it. For a weapon to deliver a solid metal projectile at those speeds, the recoil would be fatal for any normal individual. Yet Jake bore it as though it were a light tap on his shoulder. He fired it 5 times in rapid succession, placing every shot in a tight cluster despite the recoil. Klex thanked the stars above that Jake seemed focused on the kill beast. Who knows what he might have done had he discovered Klex following him in secret. He was right to stay away. This human, all humans, are dangerous beyond measure. The weapons they could wield, with that strength, the speed and precision with which they wield them, that terrifyingly cold gaze which spoke 1,000 words, all of them descriptions of bloodthirst. Klex has only now realized what the humans mean by omnivore. Super predators are classified as predators that can and do eat all other animals in their environment, including and especially other predators. He watched in horror from his hiding spot several meters away as the human preyed upon the dead kill beast. He watched it lift its kill with shocking ease, utilizing the makeshift tools to hoist it onto a rack it erected out of more of those tools and fallen branches. Watched it gut the thing open and drain its blood and innards onto the ground. Watched it carefully pick through and preserve most of those innards. It spent 3 entire days simply preparing this entire kill beast, slowly draining it, slowly drying it out, bathing it in the disgusting smell of smoke and stuffing its own intestines with its own sloughed, pulped flesh and tying them up into small packages, cutting its legs and body into strips and chunks, slowly packaging all of it into the crates, coating it in downright lethal amounts of sodium chloride. Klex doesn't even know where it got that much of such a toxic substance. Eventually, Klex could bear no more. He'd run out of the snacks he'd brought and could no longer find funguses and roots nearby to eat. He'd seen enough. He began turning back to deliver his report to the captain about this most dangerous addition to the crew, when it called out to him. "Going somewhere?" Klex's blood ran cold. He froze in place. Primordial instincts took over, and all of his muscles locked, like a wild animal caught in the searchlights of an automotive vehicle. He simply could no longer move, forced to wait in abject horror, and his death approached him. Slowly, one step at a time. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Each footfall crushing bark, twig, leaf, and soil beneath it. Each is as loud in the night of this forest as one of its weapons discharges, each accompanied by the sound of Klex's own heart growing louder and louder in his ears, pounding into a headache born of pure fear. Though he could not see it, Klex felt its hand approach him. He silently prayed to the stars that his ancestors might forgive his foolishness, that his family be treated well in his absence. Its hand now grips his shoulder. He prepares himself for the end. "Hey, buddy, you hear me? You look like you just saw a ghost. Come on, it's cold out. Warm up by the fire, you're freezing." It spoke, its words sweet like fungal sap, but Klex knew better. It just wanted an excuse to get Klex over its accursed flame, to roast him like it roasted the kill beast. He resigned himself to his fate, his muscles unlocked, and allowed the human to guide him to his inevitable demise. Yet it never came. The human sat him down near the fire, but not so near as to be dangerous. Then it just returned to its work. While chewing on a strip of the killbeast's flesh it had practically incinerated over the flame. Klex's eyes could not depart from it, as its teeth mercilessly crushed the killbeast's flesh like hammers upon forged metal. It noticed his gaze. "Oh, sorry, you want some? It's surprisingly good. Didn't think something so huge could be so tender. Unimaginably juicy, too, though that's making it a bit hard to turn it to jerky. Gonna need some help to get this done before the ship leaves." It spoke, offering Klex a portion of its kill. Klex was well shocked and could only meekly answer.
No, Klex's people are herbivore. We eat fungus, roots, and grass. Not.
He could not even choke out the word, but it spoke it for him.
Meat? Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I have some nuts I got from the hydroponics. Those work?
Klex nodded quietly and weakly accepted the small, low-moisture fruiting bodies it called nuts. After several quiet moments, the human turned to Klex and said,
"Like I said, I'm gonna need some help. Thing is not drying out as fast as I'd like, and it's huge and starting to go bad. I don't need much, just someone to package things up as I cut off strips. Think you could do that for me?"
Klex felt he had little choice but to accept his fate. If he refused, the human might see fit to use Klex to make up the difference. He wasn't sure what to do, but the human instructed him. By the next morning, the human declared that he had all he needed, and Klex silently followed him out of the forest and back to the ship, carrying half of the now full crates on his own back. He tried not to think about what was in them. It was finally time to go back to the ship. Jake wasn't sure about Klex at first, but at least he helped out. Without the extra set of hands, there's no way Jake would have been able to fill up that last crate. Between the kindly colonists and the several crates of killed beast jerky and smoked sausage, Jake was set for nearly 2 years, though he did still feel bad about using so much salt. But without any other way to preserve the meat, it was the only choice he had. He'd have to wash off the disgusting amounts of it just to make the stuff edible. It wasn't like he could just ask the captain to let him use the ship's cold storage. The duo definitely got some weird looks from the crew as they returned, but Jake didn't care. He was full from the pieces of killbeast he cooked up while he was smoking the rest, and boy was it heavenly. Every single strip was as tender as filet mignon, but as rich and sweet as pork. If he'd had some honey, he'd bet it'd make the best ham in human history. Even dried into jerky, the stuff was soft and chewy, rather than stringy like normal jerky. Too bad Klex was an herbivore. He'd have loved to share it with someone. Maybe he'll have some takers among the crew. But none of them did. In fact, for the entire year's duration of the Albon's maiden voyage, the crew avoided Jake like the plague. He asked the captain at some point, which did in fact lead to him getting used to the ship's cold storage, but she wasn't entirely certain either. However, once the Albon returned to Union space, he managed to catch one of them saying something as he stepped off the ship to return to his original post at the UNN International Space Station.
Thank the stars, the super predator is gone.